In my upcoming smoke bomb experiments, I'm going to be using quite a bit of wax. The wax I've used in my previous experiments is this white paraffin wax that I've gotten from candle bits that were burnt out enough that they were not useful. But I don't have a ton of this, and while I'm okay using it when I can get it back, it's in some ways a little bit special to me. What I have a lot of is, well, this wax, the red stuff. And that's from the cheese casings, and that's purely because I have more of it, is less special. And as you'll notice in this photo of the cheese casing, it's actually two different waxes. There's that fabric kind of coating that went around the cheese, and then there's right behind that there's this white wax, which is a kind of a softer, maybe it's food grade. I'm not sure the difference necessarily. And then there's this kind of harder red wax on the outside. It might be this is like a softer food grade one, and this is a just a harder wax for protection. I'm not entirely sure, but it was really hard to separate, so I only separated a little bit of it, and those I'm going to just keep separate and not deal with. But there's this wax which I want to melt down. So I've got some almost boiling water. And so first I'm actually going to be putting this wax in because those little clumps are kind of hard to deal with. So for this wax that I've used previously, I've just done it in these little, from the candles, the tea candles they came with. I used that as like a mold, and as I heat it up on our wood stove, but these actually are really hard to get out of here, and they actually break quite a bit when you're trying to get them out. So I'm going to be using a muffin tin to make little pucks of it that, as these shrink as they cool down, should hopefully mean that they're easier to get out and they'll be able to be cut up and useful. Another thing to note is that part of the reason I don't want to just use these straight from the cheese is that this wax, I think, has a decent amount of contamination both from the cheese directly and from just my handling of it. So I want to see if I can skim as much contamination off of it as possible. And one thing I think is rather important when dealing with wax is having tools that you use just for wax and not for anything else, because the wax can be quite sticky, and it's not something you can clean off with water or even soap. Just kind of have to, if it's a hard surface or if you have a thick layer on a hard surface, you can wait till it dries and peel it off, but it's just really hard to get off stuff. So I've got my little wax melting pot, and this thing I don't have any plans for future use of. This muffin tin is an old one we have. And the reason I'm doing this, well, white wax first, is once the red wax is in there, it's going to be much harder to get that color out, and a little bit of white wax in this is not that big of a deal. For example, there's a little something in here, probably you can't see it on the camera very well, but got that out. Part of the reason I have newspaper on here is if I make a mistake, but it's also, and drop some on it, which I'm not perfect pouring, but also just thinking that, like, I pulled that out, but there's a decent amount of wax that came out with it. So this is inherently going to be a lossy process. In this wax, you can see I was correct about that there was going to be a lot of crud in it. I just hope I can get that out, or even if it's not, it probably isn't that big of a deal. One of the other issues I'm realizing is that with this colored wax, I can't see much below the surface, so I don't know if it's completely melted or not. With the white wax, which turns clear when melted, I could see if it was entirely melted, so I'm just going to have to take a guess that it is. Looks like there's maybe one small chunk that wasn't. Oh, actually there's quite a bit in there that wasn't, but I guess that can just go into the next one. after observing how some of my earlier ones, as they're cooling down, they seem to be very stuck to the walls still. A little bit afraid of getting these out of the muffin tin. So I'm going to try 3 of them with water on the bottom. It's not really an issue that there's water on the bottom because water and wax don't mix, and anyhow I've been getting water in this, and water should stay on the bottom, but not entirely sure it's going to. After the wax is cooled, and you can see that the water did actually get down below there. I was a little bit worried as I was pouring it in. Just looks like it's going to be really hard to get out this wax. I don't really want to just flip it upside down because there's water. Yes, that came out pretty easily, but it's got a really funky bottom from how the water and wax interacted, because the first wax that went in probably got cooled down very quickly by the water, and so it stayed down there and couldn't like reform, because this is just cold room temperature water, not like heated or anything. Seen other people refine wax on hot water baths, but I didn't have a pot I was willing to sacrifice to the wax. Let's try one there wasn't water. This one definitely isn't as easy. If possible at all. This could be quite the adventure. This particular wax, I guess I can try the paraffin that I had. Compared to the paraffin, the red wax is sticky. When I scrape the paraffin off a surface, it flakes off for the most part, whereas when I scrape the red wax off, it doesn't have any sort of structure in it. Peels off fairly easily, not perfectly, but this wax here, it stays kind of sticky to this material. Isn't as desirable. Not that getting this paraffin wax out is necessarily easy. But it looks vaguely possible. There was a bit of water down below there, so might have had an effect. So having no luck of getting the ones that didn't involve water out other than the paraffin, I put this in the freezer for a couple hours, hoping that would solidify it and make it act more like paraffin, and that may be the case. Because that just came out pretty easily. Let's just hope the other ones do. Though, maybe I should have built the ring around it before I put it in the freezer. But in any case, I'm definitely using water in the future, because even with the paraffin. But if I look at this one that can I was melting them in, I was a little bit disappointed by the, lack of being able to pull off contaminants, because I definitely observed contaminants in here. But this has some in it, which I'm definitely going to remove before using it to melt wax again. So a bit of banging this, and then the ones that didn't come out by banging, prying with this, they actually came out fairly easily. I think they just need to get broken up. But one idea that I have in the future is notice that these two have water at the bottom. This one came out really easily, but this one was the last one out, though this one does kind of have the least mass because it's super thin, so maybe the banging wasn't as effective. This one I had to pry out along with a couple of these. I think only 3 came out with banging. But in general, that seemed to work. So I think what I might do is actually, if I put water in it, then pour the wax on top of it, let the wax cool to a solid, and then put it in the freezer, the water will expand, and thus it should hopefully pop the wax out some. So just kind of an idea to get it out, but that does take quite a bit of work.